Psalm 116 is a psalm written in response to a rescue. The psalmist who's writing this has been in a situation of difficulty and been trapped, or in a situation where they can't see their way out. And so in response, they've cried out to God, and he has heard their cry and responded. Let's read with me from verses 1 and 2. It says, "I love the Lord because he has heard my appeal for mercy. Because he has turned his ear to me, I will call out to him as long as I live." The psalmist goes on to explain in verses 3 to 4 that he felt as though the rope of death was around him. He didn't know what to do. He was in this midst of turmoil and suffering and difficulty and wasn't quite sure how to handle it. And so, in a sense, cries out in the only way that he knows how to for the purpose of getting God to rescue him. He can't see any other way. And so he does what most people do in the midst of complete desperation and uncertainty. He simply recognizes the inability of himself to fix it. And he cries out to God and says, "Lord, will you rescue me? Will you help me? Lord, save me," he says in verse 4. "Save me from this difficulty. Save me from this trouble. Save me from my enemies. Save me from my turmoil." And then he goes into these few verses where he describes God's character and expresses God's compassion and grace and mercy. That the Lord helps those that are weak and prevents them from stumbling, that he looks after those in need. And then in verse 12, he says this, "How can I repay the Lord for all the good he has done for me?" It's an understandable response, isn't it? When we are in difficulty and someone helps us out, whether that be that our car is broken down by the side of the road and our phone has run out of battery, or we've got no signal, and a car drive past and stop and they help us out, and our default response is, "How can I ever repay you? How can I show you my thankfulness? How can I show you how appreciative I am of what you've done for me?" And so that's how the psalmist responds to God. God's rescued him. He's brought him out of this place of death. He says, "My eyes were filled with tears, but you rescued me. And my feet were stumbling, but you protected me from falling." So how is he going to repay the Lord? Well, the psalmist writes this, "This is how I repay the Lord. I will take the cup of salvation and I will call on the name of the Lord." So I will take up that which God has poured out for me, that is my salvation. I will receive it and respond to it in thankfulness. And then what I'm going to do in response is I'm going to call out to him again. I've called out to him. He's heard me. How can I repay him for that? By calling out to him again. That seems a strange thing to say, doesn't it? I'm going to keep repaying God by calling out to him and asking him for more help. Now, our default response again would surely be, well, no, I'll do something. I will work hard. I'll try better. I'll pay him. I'll give him some money. But what the psalmist is saying here is the way that God receives our repayment, how we repay God for his help and his strength and his provision, his faithfulness, is we rely on him for those things again. We trust him for salvation and we receive it and we accept it and we're thankful for it. We live in obedience to what he's done. We live in obedience to him and the way he wants us to be. But ultimately, we trust in him and him alone. Now, I find this challenging and encouraging at the same time. It's challenging because I know that my default position when difficult situations arise is to call out to God. He rescues, I say thanks, and I then carry on. And when the next issue arises, my heart is inclined to put its trust in other things. I put my trust in my family, my comfort, my strength, my reputation, my money. I don't put my trust in him. But yet, what the psalmist is saying, understandably, is if God has rescued, the way that you repay him for his faithfulness and you express the depth of gratitude and relationship you have, is you go to him again. You may visit things such as TripAdvisor or look at the reviews on Amazon. What you may sometimes see is a review that reads such as this: "I was so bowled over by this product or this restaurant or the food we received there that I've decided not to go anywhere else. This is the place to go for X, Y, and Z." Now, in a sense, what the psalmist is saying is, my experience of God in the past has been of utter salvation and faithfulness and goodness and grace. And so in the future, I'm going to go to nowhere else for my comfort and my help. It's a challenge for us. If we want to express our love and our gratitude and our thankfulness and our trust in God, then we call out to him rather than putting our trust in anything else. But it's also a comfort to us, isn't it? Because as each of us face difficult situations, and some of us are going through them right now, the uncertainties of the future, what we should be encouraged to do by this is to look back at God's faithfulness in the past. And even if we've been crying out to him for a while and it seems that the answer is slow in coming, we take this situation and remind ourselves that whilst God might sometimes seem like he's being slow, in fact he's not. He's just working everything out for the right and for the good of those who love him. And we can therefore trust him. And we should trust him. And that we should be comforted by the fact that our God is faithful, he's gracious, he's merciful, he's good, he's steadfast in his love and abounding in mercy and grace. So therefore we keep trusting him. We call out to him. We use our past experience of God's faithfulness to equip us and teach us and prepare us for the times in the future when we will need to know and remember and trust that this God is the same today as he was back then, and that we can honour him and repay him for his faithfulness in the past by keeping resolute in our trust and our faith in him again. And he will prove once again how faithful and good he is. So church, how do we repay the Lord for his goodness, his faithfulness, his rescue? Well, we receive and accept his salvation with thankfulness. We devote ourselves to following him. And we cry out to him once again. In the midst of brokenness and the need for rescue, we call out to him because he's been faithful in the past and he will remain faithful evermore.